It was Thursday, July 6, 1972, and like every Thursday, teenagers all over the UK tuned in to Top of the Pops on BBC One. But they weren't expecting much. In the 60s, there was always the feeling that something amazing might happen on Top of the Pops, something that would shatter your world. But the last time anything like that happened was when T-Rex performed Hot Love, and that was over a year ago. The more cutting-edge rock bands now saw themselves as too sophisticated for the pop charts. What interesting thing could possibly happen on Top of the Pops?
Hey, no, no. Didn't know what time it was and the lights were low. I leaned back on my radio. Some cat was laying down some get it on rock and roll, he said. Then the loud sound it seemed to fade. Came back like a slow voice on a wave of phase. That was no DJ, that was hazy cosmic jive. There's a starman waiting in the sky. He'd like to come and meet us, but he thinks he'd blow our minds.
It is almost impossible for today's viewer to comprehend just how shocking and transformative this performance was back then. We will try to explain it throughout this series, explain why so many kids had their lives changed by what they heard and saw. It broke several grounds, but the most groundbreaking thing here was that this was the first rock and roll record that was self-aware, the first to describe its own effect. The lyrics actually predict how the kids reacted when they heard it. It's as if David Bowie knew exactly what was going to happen, what he was unleashing. This is the clever side of Glam, the side that rarely gets discussed. In this episode, we are going to see how Bowie developed his insights, and what he did with this knowledge. David Robert Jones was born in London in 1947, right on time to become part of the swinging 60s London scene. A high school dropout, David was an autodidact, reading a lot and immersing himself in philosophy, poetry, science fiction, mysticism, and art. Throughout the 60s, he went through all the changes that the vibrant times had to offer, trying to become a pop figure. In the early 60s he was a mod, playing in rhythm and blues bands, but success eluded him. Like all mods, he wanted to be unique, and when he changed his name to Bowie in late 1965, he said he wanted to be like a Bowie knife, which cuts on both edges. In other words, he was not going to fall into any side of an argument, but cut through it to create his own position. With his brilliant mind and diverse interests, he aspired to take rock and roll to places no one had gone before. For his first album, which came out in mid-1967, Bowie spent a couple of weeks learning musical composition, and, with the help of the professional musicians who reworked it, constructed an album that combines rock guitars with strings, brass and woodwind, creating weird and theatrical pieces. In every track, Bowie assumes a character, or sings about a character, and shows fascination with outsiders, with unique individualists who stand apart from society. One of the craziest tracks is We Are Hungry Men, in which the singer presents himself as a messiah who came to save us from overpopulation, and relays his insane plans that include mass abortion and cannibalism. But the people ignore him, and eventually they eat him to grow even bigger. We see the Bowie knife at work here, at once sympathizing with and criticizing both mass culture and the individualist messiah. All in all, it is a very unique album, but it failed to garner any attention. After that, Bowie became part of the hippie counterculture, growing his hair long and performing alone with an acoustic guitar. But he rapidly started to feel that the hippie ideology, and the belief it is going to change the world, is a big sham. These feelings find their way into his second album, which came out in 1969 under the title David Bowie, but was renamed by history as Space Oddity. Here, we see the Bowie knife in all its glory. The tracks of the album draw their material from hippie life and ideology, setting him apart from mainstream culture, but he also shows the futility of the counterculture ideals. Wild-Eyed Boy from Free Cloud tells the story of a boy who left his village to commune with nature, believing it to be harmonious. But the village is afraid of his strange ways, so they sentence him to be hanged. Nature then awakens in anger, but instead of helping the boy, it just destroys the village, showing that it isn't as harmonious as the boy and the hippies believe. Signet Committee is about a philosopher who preached a revolution that will bring a utopian world of peace and love. But once the revolution wins, it becomes a murderous totalitarian state, using 60s slogans to oppress humanity. And Space Oddity is about an astronaut who embarks on a space mission, which is also a metaphor for a psychedelic drug trip. It is joyful for a while, but then he gets lost in space, just like many hippies lost their minds to the drugs. The album is a document of the shattering of 60s dreams. The track that interests us the most is the closing track, Memory of a Free Festival. It commemorates a free festival that he attended in August 1969, the same month that a much bigger free festival, Woodstock, took place. One of the aims of these festivals was to provide a microcosm of the alternative society that the hippies envisioned, in which people live together in peace, just grooving together to good music, each doing their own thing and contributing to the whole. Bowie describes the festival in glowing terms, as a place where everyone was imbued with the same spirit, feeling love for each other, floating in a cloud of joyous ecstasy, sensing that they were connecting to their innermost truth. He eventually sails into Fantasyland, telling us that the joy they felt was so great that it drew in aliens from outer space, who came to join the party. It all sounds wonderful, but there is a darker undertone. The guests of the festival, sings Bowie, didn't just feel happiness and love. They believed that they actually connected to the source of happiness, that they reached an enlightenment on how to be happy forever. This is something that has always been part of Western culture, a culture that believes happiness comes from connecting to the eternal truth, and if we can figure out what this truth is, we can make happiness permanent. The hippies believed that psychedelic drugs and acid rock connect them to the truth, and the proof of that was the ecstatic joy they felt in their acid parties. But Bowie sings of this experience as a thing of the past, and tells us that the belief that they were connecting to the source was false. This is the insight that comes out of this album, the severing of the link between happiness and eternal truth. The happiness that they felt during the festival was real, but wasn't a sign that they connected to any eternal truth. This is one of the conclusions that Bowie drew from the failure of the hippies. Then again, they did have a wonderful time, and Bowie's mission throughout the next decade would be to figure out where this elusive happiness came from, and how to recreate it. Interestingly, Memory of a Free Festival, the record that launches this quest, is also the first Bowie record to mention aliens from outer space. It will take some time before he makes the connection between the two. Then came the single The Prettiest Star, and the band Hype, which we discussed in the previous episode. Hype, as we recall, was an attempt to shock the rock world, which became too earnest ensemble in its hippie phase. It was a noisy pop-art combo, offering gaudy comic book costumes and pop star behavior, things that were frowned upon by the hippies. It failed to create a desired sensation, but it did inspire Mark Bolan to invent glam rock. Bowie's next album, released in late 1970, was The Man Who Sold the World. Here we already see the personnel who will shape the character of Glam. Guitarist Mick Ronson dominates with a dense, thundering blues rock sound, and is joined by Mick Woodmansey on drums and Tony Visconti on bass, with the classically trained Ralph Mace on synthesizer, playing notes that Visconti wrote to give it a bit of a futuristic feel. Visconti is also the producer, and along with engineer Ken Scott, he creates a bombastic sound, akin to the heavy metal sound that was developing in those years. And Bowie's themes are a far cry away from what hippie rock was about, heralding the new decade in which rock will travel into forbidden realms. The album cover is inspired by the 1871 painting Sleeping Beauty by the Neo-Raphaelite painter Edward Burne-Jones, and casts Bowie in the role of the princess. In the fairy tale, the princess is put into a 100-year coma until she is awakened with a kiss. The painting was exactly 100 years old, and the cover shows that the princess has awakened. It suggests that the spirit of 19th century romanticism has gone dormant, but has now awakened to be fused with rock and roll. This androgynous cover was too provocative for America, and was banned in the States. But they would not be able to hold Glam down for long. The album continues to deconstruct the naive beliefs of the counterculture. The track Running Gun Blues takes place in a hypothetical world in which the peace activists managed to end the war in Vietnam. Its hero is an American soldier who is suddenly denied the war, so he goes out on a shooting spree to satisfy his craving for blood. Ending wars, hints Bowie, will not solve the violent tendencies of humanity. The track Savior Machine tells of a society that devised an amazing supercomputer, which managed to figure out how to solve all of that society's problems, and brought utopia. But the intelligent machine comes to the conclusion that this society is not fit for humans, and begs them to destroy it before it leads to unprecedented catastrophe. Other tracks suggest that human nature is driven by primordial drives that demand satisfaction that cannot be achieved in a utopian state. This insight connects to the work of the two figures that influenced the album the most. One is the notorious occultist and black magician Aleister Crowley, the other the equally notorious philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche. Their influence is felt in the idea that the primordial drives all come from a force within us, a force that manifests itself in these drives that control us, but if we learn to master it and direct it, it can take us to new heights. Nietzsche philosophized that this force wants to overcome, and when we overcome something, it brings us the greatest joy. If we direct it to repeatedly reshaping ourselves in a more powerful form, we will become happier and happier. The end goal is to reach a state that he called the Superman, in which you are so powerful that everything in your existence brings you joy. A big part of the album takes place away from human society, climbing up physical and figurative mountains, looking for out-of-this-world experiences that would make you stronger. With that, Bowie sets a new ideal for the 60s revolutionary youth. Instead of revolting in the name of peace and love, let's infuse our rebellion with Nietzschean values. But here, too, we have to be careful. The track most influenced by Nietzsche is the Superman, which tells of an ancient race of supermen that once lived on Earth. They achieved the ideal state that Nietzsche talks about, and became immortal beings that cannot be hurt by anything. But even this utopian state was unsatisfactory, as nothing excited them anymore. Eventually, they started to crave death, and went extinct. Bowie, then, rejects the idea of utopia altogether. Ultimate happiness is not to be found in some ideal end state we should aspire to. It has to be sought elsewhere. The key track is the epic opener, Width of a Circle. It starts with the singer telling us that he used to be someone who would blame the system for all of his problems, but then he realized that this was causing his spirit to decay. He goes out on a journey of self-exploration, which leads him to meet a deity that takes him for a ride. They engage in sexual intercourse, so powerful and joyful that they fly to the heavens. But then, while still in the act, the deity starts to pull him downward, and his mind is warning him that he needs to disengage. Alas, the pleasure is so great that he can't stop, and he is dragged down and down by the deity, who is revealed to be a demon. Eventually, he finds himself in hell as the demon's sex slave. It is, essentially, the same story as Space Oddity. There, the astronaut Major Tom leaves the Earth in a spaceship, and for a while he is joyfully floating in space. But then, he surrenders control to the spaceship, believing that since it brought him this joy, it probably knows where to go. Before he knows it, he gets lost in space. So the secret to achieve happiness is to find something powerful that will take you out of your old boring life. But you should not make the mistake of thinking that you have found eternal happiness. At some point, and we yet to figure out when, that thing that brought you joy will start to bring you misery. To be an Nietzschean hero, you must have the strength to ditch it at that point. Armed with this insight, Bowie carried on into his next album. The next album came in late 1971 and was Hunky Dory. Tony Visconti had already left the Bowie camp to work with T-Rex, and Ken Scott takes his place to co-produce with Bowie. For musicians, Bowie basically hired Ronno, a band formed by Mick Ronson out of the ashes of Hype. The band included Ronson on guitar, Woodmansey on drums, Trevor Bolder on bass, Benny Marshall as lead singer, and Rick Wakeman on keyboards. The first four all hailed from the northern port city of Hull, and were churning out basic rock and roll and rhythm and blues, the perfect counter to Bowie's arty pretensions. But Wakeman came from London, had all the arty pretensions that Bowie possessed and more, and here he brings his ornamental piano playing that would later see its full flourish in the progressive rock sound of Yes. But it is Mick Ronson who would become the cornerstone of Bowie's glam period. He already displayed his ability to blast the powerful guitar riffs and solos that rocked the previous album. Here he also shows his talent as a arranger. The essence of the glam sound developed by T-Rex was the use of strings to create a wall of sound, and Ronson was very innovative at putting together rock guitars with string arrangements, enabling Bowie to counter with a glam sound of his own. Ken Scott, a veteran engineer who worked with the Beatles on some of their most seminal records, was tired of producers passing off his ideas as their own. Here he gets his first chance at producing, and brings in a lighter, poppier feel, distinguishing it from Visconti's Wagnerian sound. It goes perfectly with the direction of the album. Because here, Bowie comes down from the mountains of The Man Who Sold the World to bring what he found there back into pop culture. Again, several tracks on the album express the feeling of being stuck in a boring existence, not knowing how to make it meaningful, and looking for something else. But this time, he looks for the answer in everyday life and in the pop world. In Life on Mars, he sings about a girl who goes to the cinema, but she doesn't have a date. She is there not for the smoochies, like most teenagers, but because she wants the movies to provide her with models of existence, like they used to do in the golden age of Hollywood. But all they give her is the same old stories which she had lived many times before. The mood changes and gets drowned in pompous movie soundtrack music, and Bowie's voice becomes theatrical as he describes the endless clichés filling up today's big screen. In the second verse he switches to singing in first person, describing himself as stuck in a world where everything has been turned into artifice and product, and the movies provide no escape. The performance reaches its peak in the chorus, when Bowie's vocal shoots up one octave as he wonders, is there life on Mars, as if the girl and the singer are trying to break out of this monotonous existence into another, more exciting world. But his voice then falls back to the original note, back into his mundane life. The problem is more than just boredom. It's much more serious than that. In Quicksand, Bowie affects a confessional tone, and tells us that he feels that he has the potential to be a Superman, but he doesn't know how to fulfill it. He alludes to several figures who try to achieve it, like Nietzsche, Crowley, and the Nazis, but he knows that since the Nazis took it to an evil place, the whole idea of the Superman is now tainted as dangerous and evil, leaving him trapped in the mediocrity of the liberal order. The discrepancy between what he feels life could be and what he can actually achieve makes him feel trapped inside his head, and he feels as if he is sinking in the quicksand of his thoughts and might get trapped inside his head and go insane if he doesn't find a way out. Finding a solution, then, becomes imperative. How can he pull himself out of the quagmire? The track Oh You Pretty Things, inspired by the recent birth of his first son, offers another insight. It prophesizes that the next generation, that of his kid, will herald the coming of the Superman. But we can't get there on our own. The record begins with Bowie waking up and looking out of the window, and realizing that there is a crack in the sky, and a hand coming down through it and reaching down to him. Aliens from another world have come to give us the key to another kind of life. The change, then, will come only by outside interference, an alien giving us a helping hand to pull us out. Alas, it is just a daydream. As the track ends, we slither right into the next track, 8-line poem, a short coda in which Bowie wakes up from the delusion and finds himself back in his son's nursery, back in his boring reality. If there's no help coming from the outside, the only alternative is to look inside. In the opening track, Changes, he once again opens by telling us that he was stuck in an aimless existence, but this time he turned to self-reflection to find out what inside him is real and stable, a foundation he can build on. Alas, he realized that there is nothing in him that is stable, as everything is subject to change. This could have led to despair, but instead, it became his first truth. If the truth is that everything changes, then this will be the foundation he will build on. The way to greatness is not to fight against the changes, but rather to learn how to master them and turn them in your favor. You have to learn to discern between the good and bad changes, and go with the changes that are good. The good changes are those that come from strange fascinations, something that is alien to your world but still fascinating. Most people are afraid of such fascinations, but Bowie announces that he is going to open himself up to them. When you let such a fascination transform you, it pulls you out of your boring world. To get out of the spiritual bog of the early 70s, then, we need to change, and for that, we need an alien to pull us out. What was alien to the culture of the time? Well, in Quicksand, Bowie sings that he feels like he is living in a silent film, unable to fully express himself. But if reality is a silent film, the way to transcend it is how the Hollywood stars did it, with glamour. The rock scene of the time, ruled by the hippies, despised glamour, because it was seen as artificial, while the hippies were about earnestly expressing what is real and natural. Bowie breaks out of this mentality by embracing artificiality. In the track Andy Warhol, he eulogizes the famous pop artist, portraying him as someone who has turned himself into a work of art, not by expressing his real self as the hippies demanded, but by creating an artificial self. Bowie describes Warhol as someone who reflects the world around him, and turns it into art. This makes him a hero, but not enough to be a role model for Bowie, since merely reflecting is not enough to achieve a heroic Superman existence. His models are the Hollywood stars, those who crafted a larger-than-life image for themselves. On the cover, he is painted as a glamorous, androgynous figure, based on a famous Greta Garbo photo. Meanwhile, in real life, Bowie maintained the hippie long hair, but adopted the Lauren Bacall look. Glamour, then, was the thing that was alien to the youth culture of the time, which he emulated. But to truly break out, he needed more. In the first part, we discussed how the music and content of the Velvet Underground were anathema to the hippies, and how they were not very popular as a result. But Bowie was attracted to the urban world that they depicted, with its unique and weird characters. Queen Bitch, which is kind of an English version of the Velvet Underground style, is about such a character, someone who represents the sinful and erotic world of the gay underground, and how the singer is attracted to her, or maybe to him. But he is too afraid to open himself up to that world, so he remains in his little room, chastising himself for his cowardice. By the end of the track, he seems to determine to go out and become part of that urban world. We get a sense that Bowie is ready to stop being just a singer-songwriter and become a performer, a rock star. His friend Mark Bolan already made this switch, and was currently the hottest star in the British Isles. Bowie was about to follow, but to do so in a more self-conscious way. He would not just be a rock star, but someone who symbolizes what stardom is all about. Hunky Dory is widely considered to be one of the greatest rock albums of all time. With hindsight, it reads like a glam manifesto. Listening to it, you realize that here Bowie already had all the ingredients of the persona he was about to create. If he was to save youth culture from its decay, he had to create a new rock messiah. This messiah had to be bigger than life, manifesting the Superman ideal. He had to appear as an alien who hails from another world, such as Mars, and cracking the sky to reach down to the children of Earth and pull them to another plane. He had to be someone who can change images and identities and recreate himself at will. He had to master the glamour and artificiality of the pop world. He had to know how to live in the urban world and turn city life into magic. He had to be a being of indeterminate gender and sexual inclination, an alien to the sexuality of the time. And he had to be the epitome of stardom, someone who is practically made out of stardust. By the time Hunky Dory saw light, Bowie already had a name for this persona, this new identity he was about to adopt. Ziggy Stardust was born. The next thing was to create the image. Bowie performed a test run in the middle of '71 with a band called Arnold Corns, a name that brought to mind Arnold Lane, the Pink Floyd record about a closeted transvestite. Bowie wrote a few songs for the band that was to be headed by a young gay fashion designer who called himself Rudy Valentino. Valentino's real name was Freddie Buretti, and he was exactly the combination of attitude, charisma, camp, and glamour that Bowie was looking for, as manifested by the movie star name he chose for himself. But he wasn't good enough to be a rock star. Once Ziggy Stardust was born, Bowie was the one to adorn this rock star persona, and Buretti became his fashion designer. Thus, Bowie had someone who would give him a look influenced by the gay underground culture, to be combined with his own studied simulation of movie stars. This already made him look strange, but to truly achieve an alien look, one more ingredient was needed. In January 1972, Stanley Kubrick's masterpiece A Clockwork Orange opened in cinemas, and caused an uproar, especially in the UK. Anthony Burgess's dystopian book, taking place in a near-future England, was adapted by Kubrick into a cold, futuristic, glamorous nightmare world, with a style that looked like nothing that came in cinema before. Alex and his Droogs, a violent youth gang, showed the darker sides of youth culture, but they also came over as a lot livelier than the decadent and hypocritical world of the adults. In Britain, the film was blamed for inspiring youth violence, and Kubrick eventually had to pull it from the theaters and ban its showing in the aisles. In 1972, there was nothing more alien and shocking than A Clockwork Orange, and Bowie was quick to capitalize. Ziggy was now to be part of a gang of aliens, and the musicians of Hunky Dory, Ronson, Boulder, and Woodmansey became a band called the Spiders from Mars. In February, they made their first TV appearance on the Old Grey Whistle Test, and the Ziggy character got his first showing, displaying a campy version of the short-haired Clockwork Orange look, a look that distinguished him from the other rock singers of the time. Here they are performing Queen Bitch.
You know my heart's in the basement, my weekend's at an all-time low. Well, he's down on the street and he's trying hard to pull sister flow. As she's hoping to score, well, I can't see her letting him go. Walk out of her heart, walk out of her mind. No, 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 she's so swissy in her satin and tie, in her barcode and bibbidi-bobbidi hat. Oh, but I could do better than that.
Even more significantly, they also presented a new song that was to be the opening track of Bowie's upcoming album.
Pushing through the market square, so many mothers crying. News had just come over. We had 5 years sighing. Blue sky wept when he told us Earth was really dying.
5 years splits the history of pop music in two. Until then, pop was just busy living in the now, not worrying too much about the future. It was dwelling inside Western culture, which believed it is marching towards creating the perfect society in the future, and it focused on having fun while we are on that march. But Bowie presents a scenario in which we find out that the world has only 5 more years to exist, and we are all doomed. The result is complete societal breakdown, since all of our ideals and values were based on the belief that we are creating a better future world. With no future, all the values collapse, and there is nothing to hold society together. You might think that this is just a science fiction number, but then Bowie speaks directly to us, and puts us in the song.
I think I saw you in an ice cream parlor, drinking milkshakes cold and long, smiling and waving and looking so fine. Don't think you knew you were in my song, and it was cool.
This is not some nightmare scenario. This is actually happening. Bowie recognized what only a few people at the time did, that the belief in the inevitability of human progress lost its ground, and the result is the collapse of modern values. He describes you, a representative of society, as oblivious to this fact, not realizing that we are doomed. Unless we find new values, we are headed towards this nightmare scenario. This opening track has very little to do with the story of the rest of the album, but it sets the philosophical stage, because the question the album will deal with is, how do we create values when we no longer believe in the march of progress?
5 years, what a surprise. 5 years, brain hurts a lot. 5 years, that's all we got. Stone love, she kneels before the grave, a brave son who gave his life to save us. Love.
The second track, So Love, wonders if love could be the answer. The singer believes that love can give meaning to his life, that it can be the thing that he can draw inspiration from, the thing that he can base his values upon. Alas, when he looks around him to try to figure out the secret of love, he realizes that there is no way of telling how to find love. It just descends upon you unexpectedly, with no rhyme or reason, and therefore it cannot be something you can build upon. Worse, it never lasts, and always turns sour in the end. Those who dedicate their life to fight for something that is based on love eventually find out that they did it for nothing. The last verse deals with Christianity, a religion that believes that God is love, but which exists in a world in which the heavens are silent and do not return our love. This leaves the singer with no other ideas on how to find value and meaning to life, so he just la-la-las his way to the end of the song. And then, suddenly, the heavens aren't silent anymore.
I'm an alligator. I'm a mama, papa coming for you. I'm a space invader. I'll be a rock and rollin' bitch for you.
The Messiah has arrived. Bursting out of the ending of So Love, the 4 lines that open Moon Age Daydream fold within them the entirety of the Ziggy Stardust character. Even though he then proceeds to complain that he can't find the words to express what he means, these 4 lines are really all we need. First of all, there's the feeling of eruption, which is the essence of rock and roll. True rock and roll is achieved when it feels like something that has been repressed is now bursting out in the open. This sensation is often accompanied by a feeling of power, of omnipotence, and is expressed by declaring, "I'm A," followed by some mythical, larger-than-life figure. Ziggy's "I'm an alligator" brings to mind a glamorous Egyptian god, but the word itself doesn't really matter. He probably chose it just for the sake of rhyming. The second line manifests the procreating power of rock and roll. There are others who felt the same alienation and repression, And once someone manages to give expression to what they feel inside, they can liberate themselves by identifying with this figure. It is like being reborn, and the rock and roll star is the mama papa responsible for it. The fourth line connects to Queen Bitch and promises that he will be the one to play the part of the seductress, opening a new world before us and changing us through the power of rock and roll. But it is the third line that contains the key to the secret of rock and roll. If it was just about creating a figure, anyone could do it. The secret of creating the eruptive power of rock and roll is to come on as an alien, with a sound that speaks to something that was buried inside people and allows them to let it loose. They then coalesce around this alien and form a group identity, and thus find camaraderie and love, that a singer of soul love did not know how to find. The rest of the song is Ziggy calling out on the youth to coalesce around him, become as one around his new message. In the first 6 months of 1972, Bowie was touring as Ziggy across the UK, converting young people wherever he went. But to really get the message through, something more was needed. Moon Age Daydream ends with a guitar solo, and it is unlike any guitar solo in the history of rock. Guitarists usually don't play like that, but Ronson was obeying Bowie's directions. It sounds like pulses of energy. It sounds like a transmission. In the first episode, we talked about how the rock and roll generation already knew how to manipulate the media. Bowie took it to a whole new level, understanding that electronic media channels are among the main instruments a pop artist has at their disposal. When you hear Ronson's solo, you can imagine Ziggy's spaceship sending a message towards Earth, towards the antennas of millions of alienated youth, waiting for a hand to come from the sky and pull them out of the quicksand. Someone to tell them that there is, indeed, life on Mars.
Didn't know what time it was, the lights were low. Oh, oh. I leaned back on my radio. Oh, oh. Some cat was laying down some rock and roll, not a soul said. Then the loud sound, it seemed to fade. Came back like a slow voice on a wave of fade. That was no DJ, that was hazy cosmic time. There's a starman waiting in the sky. He'd like to come and meet us, but he thinks he'd blow our minds. There's a starman waiting in the sky. He told us not to blow it, 'cause he knows it's all worthwhile. He told me, let the children use it, let the children use it, let all the children boogie.
Starman is a song about how some kids are transformed after hearing Ziggy's message on the radio. It was the lead-off single of the album, And when he took it to Top of the Pops, it all came true. When he pointed at the camera and said he decided to call on you, many kids all over Britain felt he was singing directly to them. For those kids, this was a revelation, a life-changing experience. This was a known experience throughout the rock and roll period, the 50 years that followed the birth of rock and roll in the mid-50s. Suddenly, out of nowhere, an alien sound would come out of the radio, and you would stop in your tracks, feeling goosebumps all over, transformed forever. But with Glam, the visuals were no less important than the music, so this experience was transferred from radio to television. In the past few months, Ziggy and the Spiders perfected their Glam look, and they shine through the TV screens. Overnight, Ziggy became a national sensation. The album was already out by this point. A month earlier, on June 6th, Bowie released The Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars, and as we have seen, so far it predicted what was going to happen, played itself out in the real world. Let's carry on with the album and see if it continued to do so.
In the sky, he told us not to blow it. She knows it's all worthwhile exploring. Let the children use it. Let the children use it. Let all the children boogie.
The fifth track is It Ain't Easy, and it is a cover of a song by the American singer-songwriter Ron Davies. The original record is a blues number, talking about the hardships of life, and how hard it is to get through this life and reach heaven in the end. Bowie changes some of the lyrics, and it becomes a song about trying to reach heaven during your earthly life, which is not easy, but possible. And with this new Messiah around, you can imagine his converts singing the song as they are flocking together and walking towards the concert hall where Ziggy and the Spiders are about to perform their first show on the Earth. This image will take us to the next track.
Stare at the makeup on his face, laughed at his long black hair, his animal grace.
Lady Stardust, like Starman, is about the reaction the crowd has to Ziggy. But while the latter was about hearing him on the radio, the former is about seeing him on stage. Both describe the excitement felt by some members of the audience, and also the rejection felt by others. Starman mentioned the fear invoked in these people by the alien. Lady Stardust relays their ridicule. But the focus is on Ziggy and his fans. The song was actually written to describe the reaction to Mark Bolan's Glam persona, and the description of Lady Stardust matches Mark to a T, and the Rex, but it is about Ziggy, and giving him some more dimensions. It accentuates his androgyny, referring to him in male pronouns but calling him a lady. And, if you know how to listen, there are also hints of homosexuality. The song is about how kids who feel that their sexuality doesn't fit the conventions react to seeing Ziggy, how he gives them a model to identify with, and thus express outwardly what they always felt inside. As they adopt the model, a new group identity is formed. Again, Bowie saw to it that it would happen in real life as well. In a magazine interview, He casually mentioned that he was bisexual, becoming the first British pop figure to come out of the closet. The historic effects that this announcement had, as well as the question of whether it was true or not, shall be discussed in a later episode. What is certain is that it was at least partly a ruse. Bowie, remember, was not about revealing his true self. He didn't believe such a thing even exists. He was about creating a heroic persona which could take him to new heights. By claiming bisexuality, he posited himself as the next step in the sexual revolution and the liberator for sexually alienated kids. His sensational statement made him the symbol of gayness, a model for all queer people. It gave Ziggy an edge, making him the most dangerous, controversial and glamorous rock star of the era. Which takes us right to the next track, Star. It begins by counting several ways in which youngsters try to change the world in the past, and dismissing them all. The way to change your world, sings Ziggy, is by becoming a star, and not just any star, but a rock and roll star. The age of the Hollywood stars was over. The only way to recapture that glamour, to create a persona that would be a role model for people to emulate, is through rock and roll. And being a star will also allow him to determine his own identity and change when needed. I can make the wild mutation as a rock and roll star, he sings, and Ziggy did indeed continue to change in order to remain an alien. The look became more and more futuristic, drawing from campy science fiction, maintaining his otherness. In the second half of '72, when he felt that the gay look was no longer alien enough, Bowie hired the Japanese fashion designer Kensei Yamamoto to give him a Japanese look, utilizing the fact that Japanese culture was portrayed in the media as completely alien to Western culture. On stage, he would change costumes several times during a performance, unprecedented in the rock world. Meanwhile, reality kept obeying the course that he set for it. He did indeed become a star, the shiniest star in the British Isles. But the track ends on a foreboding note.
I could fall asleep at night as a rock and roll star. I could fall in love alright as a rock and roll star.
This, to me, is the moment Ziggy starts to lose it. He became a star to achieve his goals of living an exciting and heroic life, to liberate parts of himself that were repressed, and to create camaraderie with others who felt the same repression. But here he starts to think that stardom can solve all his problems. The stardom was the vehicle to achieve other things, but now it becomes the main thing. It was the spaceship to take him out of his reality. But it seems that, just like Major Tom, he is now giving himself up to the spaceship and letting it control him. Star opens the B-side of the album, and the tempo is sped up compared to side A, manifesting the wild pace of a rock star's life. It becomes even faster in the next track, Hang On to Yourself. As the name suggests, it is about trying to hang on to the original reason you created your persona, not letting it get swept away by the temptations and vices of a rock star's lifestyle. The Spiders from Mars take the music into overdrive, as Ziggy is desperately trying to hang on and remember why he started it all in the first place. Again, we are reminded of Major Tom, losing control of his spaceship and getting lost in space. It is even more reminiscent of the hero of Width of a Circle, who could not stop his intercourse with the divine being, even as it was no longer taking him up to heaven but rather dragging him down to hell. Can Ziggy avoid this fate?
Ziggy played guitar, jamming good with Weird and Gilly and the spiders from Mars.
The track Ziggy Stardust recounts the inevitable end. It is told from the point of view of the spiders, and we see that they never really got the messianic side of his character. They just wanted to have a good time and play rock and roll, and enjoy the camaraderie within the movement, without realizing where it all came from. They get jealous of Ziggy's fame and tired of his grandiosity. Ziggy, meanwhile, gets swallowed up by his ego and elevates himself above them. This destroys the loving unity within the band and within the movement, as the spiders rebel and turn his fans against him. It is one of the best records ever made about the trappings of rock stardom, about what makes rock stars great, but also about what makes them go too far. A classic glam anthem.
When the kids had killed a man, I had to break up the band. Oh yeah. Ziggy played guitar.
And from there we move into Suffragette City, in which we see the other aspect of the Ziggy persona falling apart. Ziggy liberated sexuality from its confinements, taught his fans that their sexual identity should not be contained by the neat rules created by society. But eventually, this liberation led to enslavement, as the community descends into carnal frenzy. It started out as a community based on love. Now, the love is gone, and all that is left is addiction to sex.
I'm down, Benjamin. What's up with this city? What's up with this city? Right, alright. What's up with this city? Alright. What's up with this city? Oh, 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 yeah.
We are witnessing the unraveling of the Ziggy character, in reverse order of how it was presented to us. We were first introduced to his alien aspect, in Starman, then to his intersexual aspect, in Lady Stardust, and then to his stardom aspect, in Star. Ziggy Stardust then deconstructed his stardom, Suffragette City did the same to his sexuality, and the closing track takes care of the alien side. Rock and roll suicide is about the paradox of rock and roll. The rock and roll experience is born when you emulate an alien sound, which liberates something that was trapped inside you. It bursts out of your body, resulting in a feeling of ecstatic joy. You then create an identity based on that feeling, along with others who feel the same when they hear that music, and experience camaraderie and love. But once you've externalized that thing that was inside you, you made it part of everyday life, and eventually it becomes mundane, losing its alien aspect, and the music can no longer give you that feeling. You have committed rock and roll suicide, destroyed that alienated part in you that was capable of bursting out and giving you that joy. The track deals with the aftermath, and finds our hero aimlessly walking the streets, with no meaning or purpose to his life. After the frenzy of the previous tracks, the tempo is slowed down, as we are once again in the reality of quicksand, feeling that we are sinking. But then,
Oh no, love, you're not alone. You're watching yourself, but you're too unfair. You got your head all tangled up, but a fucking only make it there.
Remember, Bowie rejects the notion that there is a real self, which remains constant while our social identities change. He believes that everything in us is subject to change. And this means that once you've changed your social identity, your inner world changes as well. Something new is born in you, something that wants to express itself. And this means that there is actually no such thing as a rock and roll suicide, since you can do the rock and roll thing all over again. The track, and the album, ends with the protagonist, who can no longer find joy through what Ziggy was offering, being approached by a new messiah, a new alien, who gives him a hand to pull him out of the quicksand and bring him to the heights of joy yet again. And with this message of hope, the album ends. Thus ends the rise and fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars, the most self-conscious pop album ever made. We have seen the part of Ziggy's rise being played out in real life as well, just the way Bowie delineated it. But remember, Bowie wanted to be an Nietzschean hero, someone who doesn't succumb to the downfalls of regular humans. He lived through Ziggy's rise, but he had no intention of accompanying him in his fall. Bowie kept on being self-conscious of the processes he was going through, and reflecting them in his art. As Ziggy Mania carried on into 1973, he started to exaggerate his features, and the Japanese look became a symbol that he has become a kabuki monster. In kabuki theater, the characters are larger-than-life archetypes, not actual individuals. Bowie started to feel that Ziggy has become a monster, not a persona that expresses what he feels inside, but a larger-than-life character that he was playing for the public. He kept on playing Ziggy, but no longer identifying with him. Earlier, we asked when is the moment when a good way of life turns into a bad way of life? When does the rise end and the fall begin? We now have the answer. It is good as long as it's alien, as long as you have to fight against society to establish your identity. Once it is accepted, and once it exhausted its ability to change and appear alien again, it becomes mundane, and can no longer take you to the same heights. The only way to experience that joy again is to discard it completely, and adopt something completely alien to it. In April '73 came a new album, Aladdin Sane, and the opening track, Watch That Man, shows where Bowie was at that point. The song describes the wild New York party that he attended, while touring the US as Ziggy. Ziggy is the star of the party, and Bowie describes how he plays the part of Ziggy to everyone's pleasure, but feels completely alienated to him. He seems to him like a complete idiot, acting in an irrational and meaningless way, as do the rest of the party's attendants. The iconic album cover has Bowie with makeup that looks like a bolt of lightning across his face, but it also looks like an inverted Z, as if Ziggy split his mind. The album was perceived by the world as another transformation of Ziggy, another fantastic offering by the Martian rock star. But Bowie has actually transformed out of Ziggy, and was now a new character, Aladdin Sane, plotting to overthrow this Ziggy persona that he was trapped in. On July 3, 1973, a year after his big breakthrough, Ziggy Stardust appeared in Hammersmith Odeon in London to end another triumphant UK tour. He was at the height of his fame, the biggest teen idol, the hottest rock star in Britain. The movie made of the concert shows him opening with Hang On To Yourself, the song that depicts the beginning of Ziggy's loss of control. Then he moves to Ziggy Stardust, the song about Ziggy going overboard and losing himself to his persona. And then to Watch That Man, the song about him wanting to break away from Ziggy. He continues to do Ziggy, and the movie is a great documentary of the entire phenomenon. But then we get to the final number.
Of all the shows on this tour, this particular show will remain with us the longest because not only is it the last show of the tour, but it's the last show that we'll ever do. Thank you.
And, as the stunned crowd is trying to comprehend what they just heard, he launches into rock and roll suicide, and the title suddenly acquires a whole new meaning. Those who thought that he was joking were proven wrong the next day, as an official announcement came that he was retiring. A lot of kids had their hearts broken that night. Some never recovered from it. But that simply means that they didn't get the message. They could have avoided the heartbreak had they listened carefully to his records. Then they would have realized it was the plan all along, and perhaps understand the way of life that Bowie was offering them. A life of joy achieved by periodically changing through fusing with aliens. A few weeks later, they realized that Bowie himself did not retire. He only retired the Ziggy character. Ziggy was an experiment to see if one can experience the heights of a rock star's life while avoiding the pitfalls that come with it. Armed with this knowledge, he was now ready to go on, and like an Nietzschean hero, remain on top of the game for decades more, achieving new heights. Ziggy Stardust was dead. David Bowie was just getting started.